Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dive into a core principle of Buddhist philosophy. But we're not looking at it as a religion. Instead, we're treating it as this profound psychological framework for understanding our very own minds. You know the feeling, right? We've all been there. One single, tiny thought gets in, and suddenly it triggers this whole cascade of stress, anxiety, and just unhappiness. But what if there's a hidden logic to that whole process? A predictable chain reaction that, once you understand it, you can actually stop in its tracks.
So, let's start with something we can all relate to, the universal experience of suffering, this tangled mess we all have to deal with. The source text itself kicks things off with the most fundamental question you can ask. How does this whole mass of suffering, as it calls it, actually come to be?
And look, this isn't just about the big, catastrophic stuff. We're talking about the entire spectrum of dissatisfaction, which the source calls dukkha. It's the deep sorrow of a loss, yeah. But it's also that lamentation over what could have been, it's physical pain, it's emotional grief, and it's even that nagging, everyday sense of despair. It's really a complete diagnosis of the human condition.
Okay, so to really get to the bottom of the problem, we first need to understand the fundamental law that governs our entire experience. This is so important because this simple rule is the key that unlocks everything else we're about to explore.
So the source gives us this term, paticcasamuppada. Now, I know, it sounds a little intimidating, but the idea behind it is actually stunningly simple. It just means specific conditionality. It's the law of cause and effect, but applied directly to our inner world, to our thoughts, our feelings, and our reactions.
And check this out. This quote just lays it out so perfectly. Nothing, not a single thought, not a feeling, not a moment of suffering exists all on its own. Everything is part of this huge connected web of causes and effects. It's such a simple, powerful rule. When the cause is there, the effect shows up. When you take the cause away, the effect just vanishes.
Okay, so if suffering is the effect, then what's the cause? Or more accurately, what's the chain of causes that produces it? Well, the source lays out this incredibly precise 12-step chain reaction. It's like a blueprint for how our own minds work, laid bare.
Now, the source maps this whole thing out as a 12-link chain. Let's just look at the first 6 here. It all kicks off with something called ignorance, which is basically a fundamental misunderstanding of how things really are. And you can see how that one thing just starts this domino effect. It creates our mental habits, it shapes our consciousness, and it all leads up to the simple act of our senses making contact with the world. Don't worry about memorizing the terms, just get the feel for this initial setup. And the dominoes just keep falling. That initial contact with the world, it produces a feeling. It could be pleasant, unpleasant, or just neutral. But this moment right here is where things get really interesting and deeply personal. Because in a second, we're going to see exactly how that simple little feeling can light the fuse on a fire of craving and clinging that powers the entire cycle of suffering.
Let's zoom in on where it all begins. It all kicks off with ignorance, or avidya. This kind of fog where we don't see the impermanent, impersonal nature of things. This lack of clarity is the spark. It ignites our mental habits and our automatic reactions, the formations, and those in turn power the very stream of our conscious experience.
Okay, now this is the absolute turning point in the whole process. That simple, neutral feeling we just talked about pops up. And what's our default reaction? Craving, or tanha. We desperately want more of the good stuff and we want to push away the bad stuff. It's totally automatic. But that craving then hardens into clinging, or upadana, this deep, psychological, white-knuckled grasping. And here's the kicker. The suffering isn't in the feeling itself, it's in our reaction of craving and clinging to it. That's the game changer.
And this whole intricate chain leads directly to what the source calls the arising of this whole massive suffering. It's a complete system from start to finish. And what that means is that our suffering isn't some random cosmic joke. It's not a punishment, it's not just bad luck. It's a predictable result of a chain of causes and conditions. It follows a logic.
But here's the thing, and this is the most hopeful part of this entire framework. If suffering is built according to a set of rules, well, that means it can also be unbuilt using those same rules. By understanding the process, we gain the ability to reverse it. This is the most empowering insight of all.
Remember that simple rule from the beginning? When this is not, that is not. Well, it works just as beautifully in reverse. You don't have to dismantle the whole complicated machine. You just have to pull out one domino. Say, you address that root cause of ignorance, and the entire chain reaction that leads to suffering just grinds to a halt.
And you know, the most practical spot to jump in is often right at that crucial link between feeling and craving. If we can just bring a little bit of awareness into that tiny gap and choose not to automatically react with craving, we starve the fire of its fuel. Clinging never even gets a chance to start. The process of becoming just runs out of steam. We break the chain right where it matters most.
I love this analogy the Source uses. It talks about an oil lamp. We don't have to violently put out the flame of suffering. We don't have to fight our experience or smash the lamp. All we have to do is stop adding oil. We just stop feeding it with that fuel of craving. And what happens? Without its fuel, the flame of suffering just naturally, peacefully goes out all by itself.
So what does it truly mean to understand this chain? Because we're talking about more than just a cool intellectual idea here. This is about a fundamental shift in perception that changes, well, everything.
There's this really powerful statement in the Source that says understanding this causal process is the same as seeing the ultimate truth, or the Dhamma. Think about that. It's suggesting that insight into this machinery in your own mind is the very heart of awakening. It's not about what you believe, it's about what you can directly see for yourself.
And that, right there, is the ultimate freedom. Seeing this system clearly allows you to kind of step outside of it. Suddenly, your suffering is no longer this heavy, personal failure or a reflection of who you are. It's just a process, like the weather. You can observe the causes and effects in your own mind without getting swept away and drenched in the storm.
So at the end of the day, this ancient framework isn't just philosophy. It's an incredibly practical map of the mind. It shows us exactly how suffering is constructed and therefore how it can be deconstructed. So the real question it leaves us with is, where in your own experience, in that tiny space between a feeling and a reaction, can you begin to see this process and maybe make a change?